Good evening, Commissioner Morgan.
Good evening. How are you?
Mr. Chair, you should be. Hi, Commissioner Morgan. Mr. Chair, you should be relying on Madeline to take roll call and to do the motion for you. So she's up to speak.
Got it. Pamela, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Congratulations, Pamela.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. You'll be seeing more of me.
Commissioner Madden, welcome aboard.
Good evening, Mark.
Hey everyone, how's it going?
Good evening.
Good evening. Hi, Horace.
Can you guys hear me okay?
There you go.
Okay, great. Got a new setup tonight, so sorry.
Commissioner Madden, I have a question for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Now there's a face from the past.
How you doing, Rick? Good to see you.
Good. How are you?
Good, good.
Assistant Commissioner Kan is lurking behind my head.
Mr. Chair, would you like to give another minute or so, or would you like to go ahead and proceed? You have...
Do we have enough?
You have 5 members. You do have a quorum.
Who are we missing?
We're missing Commissioner Johnson.
Let's give her a minute or two.
Okay.
Well, I guess, shall we begin?
Yeah. I do have things I want to say before the meeting. Are we public?
Yes.
We're public? Okay, I hold my comment.
Okay. Hi, Mary Lou. Welcome to the meeting. All right, are we ready, folks?
Thank you.
Okay. Good evening and welcome to the February 2nd, 2021 Planning Commission meeting. To all of those of you who are attending virtually, thank you for joining us. Please know that we want to hear from you. If you're in the audience and you'd like to address the Commission during public comment for an item on the agenda, there's 2 options. For those of you using Zoom, please use the raise your hand button at the bottom of the Zoom screen. When it's your turn to speak, you will be unmuted and given 3 minutes to address the Commission. If you're joining us by telephone and you'd like to address the Commission, press star 9, and when it's your turn to speak, you will be unmuted and you will be given 3 minutes to address the Commission as well. Please note you may only speak once per agenda item. Madeline, would you give us an assistance with roll call, please?
Yes. Chair Biasotti?
Here.
Vice Chair Harmon?
Here.
Commissioner Johnson?
Here.
Commissioner Lethen?
Here.
Commissioner Madden?
Here.
Commissioner Morgan?
Here.
Thank you. Now we'll move on to the Pledge of Allegiance, and Commissioner Madden has agreed to lead us in our pledge, and thank you.
Pledge allegiance
To the
to the
flag
flag
Of the United
States of
States
America
of America.
and to the
To the
republic
republic
for which it stands, one
one
nation,
nation,
under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Item 1, approval of the minutes. There are none, so we'll move on to item 2. Public comments for items not on the agenda. Once again, for Zoom users, please use the raise your hand button, and for those on the phone, please use star 9. And Madeline, do we have anyone with their hands raised?
We do have one person with their hand raised.
Okay.
Councilmember Hamilton, I will allow you to talk. Can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
So I just can't get enough of all of you. I'll keep it brief. In last week's City Council meeting, I was appointed the City Council liaison to the Planning Commission, and so I just wanted to. It is customary to come to a meeting to announce the appointment and let you all know that I'm your liaison to the City Council. Should there be any matters that you want to need assistance addressing or whatever, you can come to me for those. And and I will yield the rest of my time, because I don't need to be introduced to all of you. I know you all very well and appreciate the work that you do. Thank you very much.
Likewise, and we appreciate your work too, Tom. All right, item 3, conflicts of interest. Do we have any this evening? I don't think we should, but anyone? No? Okay, item 4, public hearings. Item 4A, zoning code update. Recommended environmental determination categorical exemption pursuant to CEQA guidelines sections 15061B3, 1516.2, 15282H and 15378B and 5. Staff report, please.
Yes, give me just one moment to bring up my presentation. All right, you should all be able to see my screen now, I hope. Good evening, members of the Planning Commission. I'm Kelly Beggs, Contract Senior Planner for the City of San Bruno, and I'm pleased to bring the item before you tonight, which includes amendments to the zoning ordinance. I'd like to start by presenting the staff and consultant team working on this effort. City staff include Pamela Wu, Community and Economic Development Director, Matt Newbommer, Associate Planner, and Mark Zaffarano, City Attorney, who's in attendance at this meeting tonight. On the consultant team, we have myself and Aaron Ackman, Principal at Good City Company, and the Barbara Couts has served as outside counsel reviewing the ordinance. So the objective of tonight's meeting is to review zoning code amendments as listed on this slide and make a recommendation to City Council. As you can see, many chapters are being updated as part of this ordinance, and that's largely due to how interrelated the various chapters and sections of the zoning code are. When we amend one section, there are often many cascading effects, so I apologize for the amount of text, but wanted to show you the full scope. So tonight's agenda, I'm going to start with some background, move on to 4 central objectives of the zoning code amendment, review next steps, and then move on to commission discussion. So in March of 2009, the general plan was adopted, followed by the TCP adoption in February of 2013, and then Measure N voter approval in November of 2014. And Measure N relaxed restrictions on building height, residential density, and above-ground parking garages in the TCP area. However, no formal action was taken on codifying the TCP, and that's because of a number of variables, including the pipeline explosion, the recession, state termination of redevelopment agencies. Sorry, I think we've got a screen share issue. Let me just resume the presentation 1 second. Okay, you should all be back to me now. So I was just stating that no formal action was taken on codifying the TCP, and that's due to a number of just historical constraints and funding constraints. But then in November of 2016, the effort resumed. There was a downtown walking tour with council members and community members to talk about downtown. And then in February of 2020, the parking chapter was adopted by City Council, and that really marked the first step in the newest series of zoning code amendments. And then, as you may recall, in August of 2020, the Planning Commission held a study session to discuss this next update that's before you tonight, which focuses on housing-related issues. Okay, so this slide lists the major objectives of the ordinance amendments, which I'll discuss throughout the presentation. These objectives include implementing policies of the general plan, TCP, and housing element, revisions due to state law, which relate to ADUs and junior ADUs, and the state density bonus, and then revisions to the affordable housing requirement, as well as clarifications to administrative procedures. All right, starting at the beginning of those. So through the addition of Chapter 12.280, the ordinance codifies the zones identified by the Transit Corridors Plan, creates 5 new zoning districts outlining new permitted and conditionally permitted uses, and setting forth development standards and design standards to encourage high-quality, pedestrian-oriented design. One of the big changes for this area is that multifamily residential uses will become permitted in all TCP zones, whereas it's only allowed in the CBD currently. So the other zone that this chapter implements is actually from the general plan, and it's the multi-use residential focus area. This zone emphasizes multifamily housing and new development projects, and permitted uses include restaurants, personal and business services, hotels, and offices that would support and relate to those multifamily uses. New retail uses are only conditionally allowed, and that's to ensure that such activities are really concentrated in the existing retail districts in downtown to the north. So this slide shows the existing zoning and the area of focus. The heavy black line that you can see here, sneaking around, is the TCP area, and then the dark red area is that multi-use residential focus area from the general plan. So now you can see what these new zoning districts will look like. They correspond to the TCP and general plan maps that we looked at before. And the bright red, you can see that this is the TOD station district, which is close to the Caltrans station. The TOD1 district is located here in this orange, and it allows for a mixture of pedestrian-oriented land uses. And then we have the TOD2 district, which is this purple that goes along Camino Real. And then we have the Civic Center district right here, which, as you may know, is where City Hall, Fire Department, and the library are all currently located. This bright red is the CBD district, which does track with the existing CBD district but expands it slightly. And then further south we have the MXR district, which implements that general plan district. You may notice that there are some of these hatched areas that are planned development zones, and all of those zones actually were designed to be consistent with the transit corridors plan. So we are not rezoning those as part of this effort. There are a few other parcels throughout the city that would be rezoned as part of this effort to make it consistent with the general plan. All right, so moving on to the next objective. The next objective for the ordinance is to achieve consistency with state law and land use regulation, and that most specifically relates to ADUs and the density bonus. So I'll start with ADUs and junior ADUs, and that's Chapter 12.90. The Commission may be aware that 6 new laws went into effect in 2020, which limit the city's discretion in regulating ADUs. So, for example, ADUs have to be allowed in all residential and mixed-use zones, and an additional junior ADU must be allowed in single-family zones. An 800 square foot ADU must be allowed regardless of floor area and lot coverage. ADUs are now allowed in multifamily structures. Setback requirements for ADUs were reduced to 4 feet for the side and rear. And then the height limit must be a minimum of 16 feet. Maximum floor area cannot be less than 850 square foot for studios or 1 bedrooms, and then 1,000 square feet for more than 1 bedroom. So I will just discuss the areas where the city does have discretion. And those include the following items. So the city has to allow at least 16 feet in height for ADUs, but we are able to establish a higher height limit and to allow a 2nd story. And that is consistent with what is in the current ordinance, as well as in these new amendments. So we do allow a 2nd story, but the 2nd story has to meet the underlying zoning district setback standards, and then also meet residential design guidelines. The city can also choose to allow a higher square footage maximum than the 850 and 1,000 I referenced in the previous slide. So this ordinance does include a provision for large lots that allows up to 1,200 square feet for an ADU. The city can require replacement parking for junior ADUs, and the new ordinance does require that due to existing parking shortages in single-family neighborhoods. The ordinance is also able to have requirements for privacy, so we would be careful about locating windows as well as balconies facing side and rear property lines. And then architectural compatibility can be required between the primary and the accessory unit. Lastly, Due to the way the city's development standards are structured in residential districts, the city could require conditional use permits for ADUs that exceed 800 square feet and exceed the permitted floor area and lot coverage. However, as the goal is to really streamline the ADU production, the ordinance does not currently require a conditional use permit for this, as long as provided that the ADU meets the size requirements within the ordinance. Okay, so the next item for state law consistency is the density bonus chapter. So the state density bonus gives projects with affordable housing components access to a bonus over the allowed residential density and access to waivers and incentives to make the project feasible. Recently, state law has increased the available density bonus from 35% to 50% for projects with an affordable housing component, and then has increased the density bonus to 80% for projects that are 100% affordable. And projects within a half-mile transit have even more flexibility granted. The city has very little discretion over this topic, but the new density bonus chapter does set forth application requirements and procedures to help the city process these applications, as well as a maximum allowable residential density definition, and that should help the city to calculate the density bonus in areas that are controlled by form-based code rather than areas that require a certain amount of lot area per unit. Lastly, the chapter includes references to state law for the available bonus relative to the amount and depth of affordability, and that will help the chapter to continue to be consistent with state law throughout future legislative cycles. Okay, the next objective of the zoning ordinance is to update the affordable housing chapter. So I'll start by showing this slide, which I also showed in August, just to provide context for the city's affordable housing chapter. This shows the city's progress on meeting the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, also known as RHNA. As you can see, the city is not on pace with producing housing at any income level pursuant to RHNA. Just a note that the Mills Park project units are not included in this and won't be until the building permit is pulled. But as discussed earlier, through the addition of the mixed-use district chapter, multifamily housing will now be a permitted use in far more areas of the city, which should help to address this deficit. And then in addition to that effort, the ordinance includes changes to the affordable housing chapter to strengthen these requirements and to assist the city in producing more affordable housing. This slide shows the requirements from the current ordinance. So as you can see, affordable housing requirements kick in for development projects of 5 or more units. Rental projects are required to pay a fee rather than provide on-site housing, but they may elect to provide on-site housing as an alternative to paying the fee. One of the central amendments to this chapter is to require those rental projects to provide the on-site affordable housing. And the reason for this preference for on-site rather than payment of an in lieu fee is that there's a substantial lag time for the city to collect funds from an in lieu fee to be able to finance an affordable housing project. So requiring the on-site affordable enables the city to produce affordable housing on pace with that market rate. So this slide shows the proposed changes relative to the current ordinance. As you can see, we're keeping the threshold for applicability to 5 units. For rental projects, it's distributed among the income groups, adding to a total of 15%. And then for the ownership projects, it's more concentrated towards the moderate income level, but with 5% devoted to low income. All right, next we can move on to the last objective for tonight's discussion, which includes updates to administrative procedures. All right, so the ordinance includes clarifications to the architectural review permit. And what we've done here is we've developed different categories for architectural modifications and additions, as well as for new buildings, and dedicated associated approval bodies to those. So minor alterations like a materials change would be considered at the director level. Major alterations like a complete change in architectural style would be considered by the ARC. New buildings would be considered by the ARC or Planning Commission, subject to the size thresholds listed of 6 units for residential developments or 10,000 non-residential square feet. And then along with these changes, the Architectural Review Committee meeting will become a public noticed hearing. We did make that amendment to the public noticing section. And then if adopted by council, the bylaws for the ARC will be updated to formalize the committee meetings as public meetings. And then projects in the Bay Hill specific plan, which I understand you'll be reviewing in 2 weeks, would also be subject to this process and these thresholds. All right, lastly, just to summarize some other administrative clarifications that have been made. There have been a few other edits to the AR permit chapter regarding objective findings and application requirements. And then a new zoning administration chapter has been added to consolidate information on zoning administration that exists elsewhere in the code, all into one chapter. Those topics include application, completeness, and appeals, as well as expiration periods, extensions of planning approvals, and how to process multiple entitlements with different associated bodies. All right, so that covers the majority of my presentation for tonight, and I will talk about next steps and where this goes. So following this meeting, staff will forward the Planning Commission's recommendations to the City Council. Council is expected to hold a study session later this month, followed by a public hearing to formally introduce and take action on the amendments. A second reading will be required thereafter, and with this schedule, we would anticipate that the ordinance would go into effect in May. All right, so we can open things to discussion. I would just like to start by summarizing a few public comments that we received, as well as answering some questions from commissioners. So I'm just pulling up one comment. So the city did receive a public comment from Alexander Melendres, and I will just read the contents of the email. Hello, San Bruno Planning Commission and City staff. My name is Alex Melendres, and I'm only representing myself and no one else. I am encouraged by the zoning code update on tonight's agenda. We must continue to allow more opportunities to zone for multifamily housing. Additionally, with our incoming RENA allocation, plus how far behind on our current goals, we will need to zone as much housing as possible. Zoning is a community-adopted system. What constraints exist are largely self-imposed. We must shed those as much as possible and choose pro-integration policies. One of the things I noticed in the staff report was some of the parking requirements for ADUs. I understand the constraints of parking in eastern San Bruno. However, given the variety of lot sizes, especially the further west you go in San Bruno, and the constraints that parking requirement may have on the production of ADUs, I would ask that the Planning Commission consider eliminating the parking replacement requirement for junior ADUs. Proximity to transit, the decreasing usage of cars, ADU usage by less car-dependent communities like aging-in-place seniors, and more all play into how replacement parking is an unnecessary burden on junior ADU development. We have a housing crisis, not a parking crisis. Someone's need for shelter, to live, work, eat, attend to life necessities is arguably more important. Thank you for your public service to the Planning Commission. All right. So we received also a few questions from Vice Chair Harmon that I'll respond to right now as well. And feel free to chime in if I get anything wrong. But I think the first question that Vice Chair Harmon had asked was about rescinding the TSM chapter, and that relates to Transportation Systems Management. Excuse me. So that actually relates to a pretty outdated county program. right now, the way that transportation demand management is really working is more on a project-by-project basis through environmental analysis. And oftentimes TDM plans are required to be implemented as mitigation measures. And then we also have some provisions in our parking chapter that provide an incentive for parking reduction if the project introduces a TDM plan. So it's less of that is being removed and more that it's replaced by these more modern processes. And then I think the other question was related to accessory dwelling units in the 65 plus airport noise contours. And staff has confirmed that those are allowed. All right, looks like I covered that.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I was hoping it would be a simple answer. Yeah, I appreciate
that one's an easy one. And then lastly, we just did want to note that we received public comment related to some developments in the Bay Hill specific plan area regarding the floor area definition. And staff will just be making some clarifying edits to that definition. Okay, so that concludes my very long portion of this, and the commission is welcome to open to discussion.
All right. Thank you, Kelly. Is there any member of the commission that would like to speak? And that would be Commissioner Harmon. Right ahead.
Since I was already talking, I did want to respond to Alex's comment a little bit. I did observe, I mean, I am guessing that the deal is that the state law prevents us from requiring parking replacement for ADUs.
Correct.
Whereas for JADUs, we have flexibility.
Correct.
And I can understand, which, you know, like, I mean, a lot of JADUs are specifically garage conversions. So, like, you are definitely removing a parking space. And so, like, I can understand, you know, like, that has an impact. But I wonder if we could make it some sort of, have some sort of discretionary level where, like, it's not 100% required that, you know, every JADU place the parking, you know, subject to some kind of staff review of parking conditions in the places. Because, like, I do agree with Alex's point that, you know, like, we need a lot of housing units, both just as a matter of what the state is going to be requiring of us and as a matter of moral imperative. And so whatever we can do to create the flexibility to get that done, you know, I think would be good.
Okay. Is there anyone else? Commissioner Madden.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, I just had a question. So a lot of this stuff is kind of new to me. But what is the difference between a JADU and a ADU? Is it a square footage threshold or something else?
It's a few things. I'm actually going to pull it up so that I don't misquote our new chapter. So a junior ADU is no more than 500 square feet in size. So it is partially related to square footage. There's also a requirement for a junior ADU that it has to be converted of existing floor area, so entirely within a single family dwelling unit. And then the last item is that it can share sanitation facilities with the single family dwelling unit. So it has to have an efficiency kitchen, but technically it could be connected to the single family unit and share bathroom facilities, basically.
So typically that's converting a garage, like a detached garage, or
it could be a room of your house that you just decide to use differently and renovate.
Okay, and it must be less than, I think you said 450 square feet?
500 square feet.
500 square feet. So if someone built a completely detached new structure, regardless of the square footage, that is an ADU. Is that correct?
Yes. I mean, it has to meet the maximum sizes, and it has to meet the minimum size as defined by the building code for an efficiency unit, which I think is about, it's very small, 150 square feet.
So basically what this is saying is if you're building a brand new structure, it's the minimum 150 square feet, say, and up to 850 square feet, we're basically allowing them to do that as long as they meet the setbacks and they're one story.
So yeah, well, depending on, they can be, for an ADU, it can go up to 1,000 square feet for more than one bedroom, in lots that are less than 7,500 square feet in total area, and then above 7,500 square feet in lot area, you can actually do up to 1,200 square feet for an ADU.
Okay. And then it sounds like that does not count toward the lot coverage calculations anymore? Is that what I read?
Right. So basically, state law requires you to permit an 800 square foot ADU regardless of what the kind of existing site conditions are related to lot coverage and floor area. The way that San Bruno's regulations are written, as I'm sure you know, is that projects that do exceed the permitted floor area and lot coverage, if it were just a single-family home, can then apply for a conditional use permit. We are not recommending applying that to ADUs.
Okay. And
so that procedure would continue for like an addition to a single-family home, but not for an accessory dwelling unit.
Okay. And lastly, I think you mentioned a height limit and some daylighting privacy provisions as well. I remember in a previous council or commissioner meeting, there was no actual daylight plane provisions in our code. Is that true?
The daylight plane provisions are actually in the residential design guidelines, so they're not codified in the code, but they exist in a separate document.
Okay, and would we be codifying that now with, as it pertains to accessory dwelling units that are 2 stories or not?
No, it just refers to the residential design guidelines.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I think there was something in the literature about maybe increasing that to 20 feet. I think that's a practical thing to do because typically in a house you have 8-foot floors, and then you have the thickness of the floor at level 2, and then you have the roof, and then you have foundation crawl space. By the time you add all that up, you're probably adding 18 to 24 inches to the structure height. So probably a good idea to at least raise it to 18 to 19 feet. So, okay, and this is saying any single-family home in the entire city can do this now. Is that the...
That's the case under state law. It precedes this ordinance even.
Got it. Okay. That's all I've got. Thank you.
Very good. Any other commissioners with questions for staff or for Keller? Commissioner Letta.
Hi. I think in my list, the main question that I had for staff did go back to the parking difference between the ADU and the junior ADUs, and I just my concern is striking a balance between ensuring that the quality of life remains positive for the people who are in these more compact areas with limited parking, but at the same time, because of lot size and any other factors that may prevent somebody from building an ADU, I'd hate for, kind of like Commissioner Harmon was saying, I would hate for restrictions in parking that could potentially be remedied in some creative way. I wouldn't want these units to be prevented from being built. I do understand if somebody's converting their garage into an apartment, that is actively eliminating parking and adding housing. So I would you mind just clarifying again, please, what the parking requirements are for each one?
Sure. So there's no parking required for a junior accessory dwelling unit. So 0 space is required to build it. But as the ordinance is currently written, if you were to entirely convert a garage, you would need to provide on-site parking for whatever the amount of spaces in the garage were somewhere else on the lot. For ADUs, you are allowed technically to require 1 space per ADU, but it's really limited the areas in which that would actually apply because there are so many exemptions. If the ADU is at all close to any kind of transit stop, so I believe it's within a half mile of public transit, including bus stops, then there's no parking required. And then for ADUs, there's also no garage conversion parking required.
So technically, if you, I guess what a question I'm asking is, if you are converting a garage into housing, that by definition cannot be an ADU. It would have to be considered a JADU?
No, it could certainly be an ADU. It would just have to provide both a kitchen and a bathroom and exceed 500 square feet.
Okay, and so if an ADU were to take the place of an existing garage, what would the parking implications be?
The parking implication could, in very, very limited areas of the city, be that they have to provide one space on site somewhere, but it's likely that there's both no replacement parking required for the conversion and then also no parking required for the accessory dwelling unit.
So I guess it sounds like there's not an enormous difference between the parking for an ADU and a JADU.
Yeah. I mean, it is just the one area where you can regulate parking, basically, as for a junior ADU. Pamela, she wants to check.
Through the chair, if I may. Commissioner Lissette, to kind of look at this, the state law has provided a lot more flexibility to construct an ADU. The only difference between an ADU and a junior ADU is how it's constructed. An ADU has its own kitchen, its own bathroom, its own access, its own address, and it could be a detached unit in the back. As Kelly said, even though the state has this very small caveat for the cities to require parking, 99.5% circumstances in City of San Bruno is not going to trigger a parking requirement for an ADU. However, the state law does say if you have an ADU and you want to build another junior ADU, that is a bedroom conversion that doesn't have a bathroom, but you have an efficient kitchen, less than 500 square feet. City, you have the discretion to require some sort of parking replacement if the junior ADU was to convert the garage. Think about it as a single-family home being converted into a triplex. So you have a single home, now you have an ADU in the back, and you also have a garage conversion as a junior ADU. So the state is saying, city, in that incident, do you want to require maybe one parking replacement to compensate for the third unit coming in?
I see. No, and put in those terms, it does seem reasonable. I just wait to see people not being able to add housing, but I think that I think it does seem reasonable. I'll think more about it. Thank you very much.
Sure.
It looked like Commissioner Harmon had a question or comment.
Yeah, as I recall, we had, as part of our parking ordinance revision, we were going to be trying to expedite or sort of like do by right permitting ministerial approvals for things like converting a small portion of the yard to an additional driveway spot for this type of thing. And I don't know, like, have we waived some of the old hardscape requirements for that purpose or anything like that? Because I really I would like us to have as much, I would like to not see a case where this parking requirement means that somebody is going to be 2% under the sort of non-hardscape requirement and that blocks it.
Yeah, so I can start to answer that. Pamela looks like she wants to jump in too. So that provision that you're referring to is in the code, but I believe the city council first has to designate an area as a high-impact parking area for that to then come into effect. So basically, the pathway exists to do that, to allow kind of more creative parking arrangements in the front yard. But city council has to act first.
Through the chair, Kelly, I do think that we also allow side yard parking.
Yes, there is side yard parking that has been allowed previous to the parking code update, and that was continued and kept consistent in the parking update.
Yep.
Very good. Any other commissioners with comments? Questions? Commissioner Madden, please.
Yeah, sorry, just a couple quick ones. The setback rule of 4 feet from the side lot and rear lot, is that something that is like set in stone, or are they allowed to go inch closer to that with a ARC review or something? Or
well, so the setbacks, if it's a new development, it would be a 4-foot setback, and that's state law that sets the 4 feet. But if you are reconstructing or converting an existing structure, then it's whatever the existing condition is.
Right, and is there any change to the distance that if you say you're building a detached ADU from an existing house, I believe there was like a 10-foot spacing or...
That's regulated by the building code, and the building code still applies. I believe it's 6 feet.
6 feet, okay, so you can, because it sounds like you can build multiple units now in certain lots, so 6 feet from one another and any existing structure, is that kind of the rule of thumb that they need to be clear from?
Yes, I mean, unless there's some kind of existing condition, but building and fire safety review would still apply to those.
Okay, all right, that's all I have.
Thank you. Anyone else? Commissioner Johnson, Commissioner Morgan, either of you have comments this evening? No?
I'm trying not to dominate, but I do have a couple more.
Go ahead, Commissioner Harmon.
Okay, let me pull up my notes. There are a few other things. Let's see. I guess actually just quickly off of what Commissioner Madden was saying, and I think my understanding is that it would be 2 residential structures because you'd have potentially a standalone ADU and an integral. The JADU is within the main body of the house, and then you could potentially have some additional structure like a garden shed or something that would be separately permitted and non-residential, but it would still be only 2 residential structures.
Yes, unless you're in a multi-family district.
Okay, sure. Yeah, if you already were in an R2, and so you already have, sure, that makes sense. Okay, so I know it's on page 9 of the packet about the discussion of the Mountain View model of, and I mean, I understand it's more complicated, but I know, as Councilmember Mason observed last week, we've produced 0 VLI units in, 6 years out of this current RENA cycle.
That sounds right.
And so, I remain concerned that we are not finding the right sort of flexibility to find the way to incentivize, to say, hey, maybe you can do a slightly smaller absolute number of units.
Yeah,
but
so we did develop something similar to that to address that concern. So there is an alternative available that would require City Council approval, but it does allow exactly what you're talking about for perhaps fewer units of deeper subsidy to be developed, subject to certain findings. So that would just be an alternative, and I believe one of the findings is that it has to address a city RENA deficit.
Right, and that's actually my next note, is that that's on page 12, where we have a discretionary process for this. I feel like that developers are much more likely to use it if they have more certainty that it will work, that they're not going to take the time to develop a plan that may then be rejected by a council vote. That I feel like people would be more likely to use this if they know going in, I'm meeting the requirements. So, right. Yeah, I did actually review that. So I don't know, I still, my feeling is that we should, kind of make clear what we want up front for this, but I don't know. I mean, I'm not upset about it enough to vote against recommending this overall package, but I do really think we should be concerned about the lack of VLI units.
And through the chair and vice chair, Armin, one thing I'll note is most of the very low income units you see produced throughout the Bay Area are usually into 100% affordable housing projects because they're able to leverage local contributions, what the local zoning is, and then use tax credit funding in order to fund those and produce very low-income units. I think the issue that San Bruno's had in the last housing cycle is that the zoning hasn't been in place. So it hasn't given the nonprofit housing developers like you were saying, the confidence that their project could be approved. So I think just putting forward these zoning code text amendments that put into place the rules for the entire transit corridor area for housing is going to give a lot of nonprofits the certainty they need to move forward with the projects, and that's where you're going to see a lot of progress made within the very low-income units. Much like San Bruno did the first cycle, or 2 cycles ago at the crossing, where you saw a production of over 100 because they were able to leverage the zoning there along with tax credits and produce units.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I don't know, like I as sort of a matter of, I don't know, social engineering you want to call it, like I do feel like there is value to the whole inclusionary zoning model where we say that, like, you know, it is healthy in society for well-paid engineers like myself actually like rub elbows with, be neighbors with, you know, have your kids playing with, you know, the people who are sort of earlier in the process of climbing the ladder of the American dream, you know. So I do appreciate what you're saying, but yeah, I would, and I'm glad, I mean, we have a 5%, like a formal, you know, every project is going to try to include some, so I think that's a good start.
Yeah. And I think from general, like, urban planning philosophy, I think 100% agree with what you're saying. I think you both have to have mixed income buildings, probably even more importantly is mixed income neighborhoods so that you do use the same amenities. And to your point of how I would see this playing out on an annual basis is the city has to turn in a report to the state every year that says, hey, this is how we're doing on our housing element implementation. Within there, you're going to see on an annual basis how many very low-income units, how many low-income units you're producing. What I would recommend for any city is during that report, we say, hey, over that, you know, we're really short on very low-income units right now. In the next year, when we see projects submitted, we want to see these submitted with more very low-income units. That way, when the next developer submits, they've already heard some council direction related to what type of affordable housing you want to see in incoming projects. And that might fluctuate from year to year.
Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate the attention to it. Let's see. I was curious about how fractional units are treated in small multifamily buildings. So I think it was when I was looking at page 135 for a mid-sized project. So if you were going to have 5% required each for the VLI, LI, and MI categories, and say it is 26 units, and so that would be 1.3 units for each, which would be 3.9 total. It's not clear to me from the text, and maybe I didn't spend enough time puzzling over it, but it wasn't clear to me whether this would mean you are required to do 1 unit each because 1.3 rounds down, or whether the 3.9 rounds up and so you need 4 total and one of those has to be allocated somewhere, or kind of like how we deal with the, you know, with the fractional units in these calculations.
Yes, I'm just looking at this to confirm, but I believe that if it's a fraction of 1/2 or more, it's rounded up, and then if it's less than 1/2, you either construct 1 additional unit or you pay a partial unit payment on the in lieu fee, and that's
right. Yeah, the partial unit fee I remember, but so the question was, does the rounding apply within the category or to the total requirement? right? Because there was this case of you could have 1.3, 1.3, 1.3. Each of those would round down, but 3.9, the sum across them, would round up. And I wasn't clear. Obviously we will produce more affordable housing if either case rounding up imposes a requirement.
I'm just taking a look at the language to see if it gives us any guidance here.
I think I read it about 4 times and couldn't decide myself what it meant, so.
I mean, I would think that it's by category, but open to Pamela and Aaron's interpretation of that as well.
Yeah, to Vice Chair Harmon's point, I think that's ultimately a policy decision that we have to make, and we have to make sure that we define it well within the code. So what I would say is let's hear from the Planning Commission on your thoughts, and then we'll forward that to the City Council and make sure that we tweak the language in a way that's consistent with what the Council ultimately wants to do. You're right, because a lot of codes can be super ambiguous, so we don't want it to be that way if we actually want a certain policy to be implemented.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is just that it be clear, that everybody knows what the rules are. My personal preference is that we create the rules such that, if the sum across those fractional units is something that's going to round up, you do have to allocate that unit somewhere, somehow. As long as the rules are clear and, the person who's submitting a project knows what they need to do and doesn't have to go back to the drawing board because of this confusion, that's really the most important thing. Let's see. Oh, I should have written my notes a little more clearly. Let's see. I had page 138. It was like the code B1B. What was that about? Page 138. Sorry. I'm just refreshing my memory on what I was concerned with here. So it was section capital B, subsection 1, subsection B. Oh, right. I was a little concerned about whether this, the structure of this, because we are still allowing the in lieu fees specifically for buildings with very large unit sizes, it seems like. And that seems like it almost incentivizes kind of exclusive luxury buildings where it's like you're gonna build something that's like all 4-bedroom large condos.
So just to kind of tell everybody else what we're talking about, this is a section of the alternatives to providing on-site affordable housing and the payment of in lieu fees. And one of the findings that council must make is that the average unit size in the project is seeking to pay an affordable housing in lieu fee equal to or greater than 2,000 square feet for 4 bedrooms. So just to respond to Vice Chair Harmon's comment, I believe that this actually makes the in lieu fee is on a square footage index. So this actually is trying to make sure that the project's not trying to shortchange the city by only providing a very small amount, by minimizing their payment of the in lieu fee. Does that make sense?
Not sure. I'm not quite sure I follow. So, in this case, it was that was it average or was it every unit?
The average unit size.
Average unit. Okay.
And that's the unit that's seeking to pay the affordable housing in lieu.
Yeah. It seemed like the use case for this option was that, like I said, that you build a building that sort of consists exclusively of large units, and then you pay the in lieu fee. It seems like it runs counter to the conversation we'd had just previously about the general desirability of having some mixing of economic classes. That this sort of seems like a provision that is beneficial to the person that kind of wants a gated community with only their, golf buddies. And I guess I'm just looking for, like, how do we prevent it from being used that way? Like, how do we say, like, we're not looking to provide, Trump Tower San Bruno.
So I'll have one answer to that, and ultimately, again, this is just kind of another policy call question and direction. This is typically found within codes because of the fact that when, let's say, you have single-family neighborhoods, you may only get 2 or 3 affordable units, but then in lieu fee, you could take and produce a whole lot more units down in the transit, let's say in the transit corridor area that are more proximate to transit, proximate to other amenities. So a lot of cities like to take that big lump sum of money and then leverage it to create more units in areas where you would typically have access to amenities. But to your point, I think the counter policy argument is that you do want some folks to, folks of all income levels to live in a single family new neighborhood. So, I mean, like everything else, I think it's a policy call that we could work out within the code, and it's something that we'd want to hear from the Planning Commission so that we could bring that to the City Council.
Through the chair, can I jump in on that one?
Yes, go ahead, Kelly.
Yeah, I like the idea of having the balance. I think there's a benefit to, having a variety of income levels in each project built on site. But I also see the benefit of having money tucked away to build these units in areas that would be really beneficial. How do we go about? I'm just curious how the code is written about how the developer would determine whether or not they may or will pay the in lieu fee or build on site. What is the discretion there, please?
So the kind of default option is to provide on site, and then they have an option of applying for different alternatives through City Council discretion. So the alternatives would include the payment of the in lieu fee, off-site affordable units. As I mentioned earlier, we also have kind of like an alternative percentages provision. And then there are a few others, including the dedication of land, purchase of existing units for conversion, just a few other kind of niche scenarios that they could apply for, and those are all subject to findings.
So default is that they would need to build on site. If they wanted an exception, they'd have to take it to City Council.
That's right, yes.
Council would presumably be informed about the needs and the benefits, and that would bypass Planning Commission.
Yes, and some of them require also economic analysis to back up the alternative.
Okay, so it's not, they don't have just a choice to counter. And
no, not carte blanche.
Okay, all right, thank you.
And through the chair, if I may provide some clarification, right now the code says that the developer has the discretion on their own to either pay the in lieu fee or to provide on site. As the commissioners have seen, we have very little developers who want to provide those units on site. Some are for good reason, some are for not so good reason. So the changes that we're recommending is, well, number one, you're required to provide on site. However, for some reason, for instance, if they're up on the skyline, it's just not accessible to public transit. It doesn't really make sense. You have one unit out of, 5. Do we really want to take that on? Maybe when we're going through the entitlement, City Council will weigh in on the ultimate alternative choice.
Okay, I'm happy with that answer. Like I going back and looking at the top level of the capital B section, that it's pretty clear this is if approved by City Council. So that does, I think that's fine. Let's see. I promise I will get to the end of these. Page 61. What did I have on page 61 that had... This was, I sort of went through all of my affordable housing ones first. Page 61, building code delay. Oh, yeah, there was something in here about... Oh, was it 61 as numbered, or was it 61 in the PDF? Because the page numbers at the bottoms are... Ah, yes, it's okay.
I think it's at the bottom, because I think you're in definitions.
It's code section 129070. 12.90.07. Though page 61 is numbered 82 in the packet. I guess I wanted to make sure I understood the point of this delay. Is the idea is here we're trying to get people to legalize the many illegally constructed ADUs.
Navigating to the chapter.
Having been on the market to buy a house in San Bruno or nearby 5-ish years ago, like half the buildings that we looked at had what were clearly, I mean, they could not possibly have been inspected, modifications, ADUs, whatever. That's chronic, and I guess I am definitely, if I'm correctly understanding this, I'm in favor of it. Like, I'm glad to see it, but I did just want to sort of like, is that the point of this?
I think it's to allow a delay in corrections to violations of building standards.
Yeah.
That it has to be built prior to adoption of the ordinance.
Right. Yeah, obviously we don't want to sort of like incentivize gaming it, but yeah. So yay then. I'm glad that's in there. So page, I think it must be page 67 as numbered. Let me just double check. Right, about the slope rule. So we have this rule where we cut down the floor area ratio on sloped lots, and like I've been at houses up in the Berkeley Hills. I have some, friend of the family whose parents have one of the expensive houses up at the top, and like there are a lot of cases there where you'll see a house that has like 2 levels above ground and then one that's dug into the hillside, so it's sort of like a basement, except the back end actually has windows facing the bay. And these houses don't end up feeling huge. I mean, they look like sort of a typical 2-story house from the front. But I'm fairly sure, because they are 3 floors, that they're well over a 0.5 FAR. And I get these limits seem they seem at first blush to me unreasonably low and I guess I wondered what the reason was that we're constraining. I mean, because you can definitely, obviously the building standards to build safely in a sloped environment, you have to sort of anchor things and dig into the hillside rather than putting stuff on stilts above the hillside, but it's definitely possible.
So I think I could add a little bit to that. I think the overall theory, at least for San Bruno, was that the lots up in the hills are quite a bit bigger than lots that are down in the flatland of the area, so they're already having a proportional advantage on the overall size of the home. This also isn't a hard cap, so there's the ability to go above that through the use permit process. So I think the overall idea was that you're already going to have a pretty big house when you're up in the hills, because the lots are 6,000 to 7,000 square feet, versus in the flatlands you have your more traditional 2,500 to 5,000 square foot lots.
I mean, I guess if that's the thought, I don't see why we don't just sort of directly target that rather than assuming that the sloped lot is larger. I mean, maybe they are on average, but...
Yeah. And I think that's why you have... No, I mean, that's a legitimate point. And I think because this ordinance was originally written, I think, in 1989, so it's pretty old. But I think the thought at that point was, we're going to look at this on average, and we're going to make it a soft cap and have the ability to go over that if there's a lot that isn't the average situation, so that a property owner there isn't a hard FAR cap overall on that
suppose we have some sort of legislative intent language somewhere, because I know it comes up, and we just recently had, I forget whether it was the Planning Commission review or at the Architectural Review. I think it was the Planning Commission review of one of these, somebody doing a second story, and we had sort of neighbors complaining about it exceeding the FAR guideline. I guess I guess I sort of want some clarity that we're not necessarily saying that if you have a sloped lot that is somewhat more modest, we're intending to discourage you. So. Anyway.
I think I don't. It was originally called. It was this ordinance called Ordinance 1520 back in 1989 in San Bruno. And I think it did have some legislative intent. Who knows if that's still the intent of it now? Things evolve over the years, but I think ultimately it's it's done as a soft cap, understanding that there are going to be situations where you have to look at that individual application.
All right. Yeah, we pretty routinely. People don't bring projects to us for conditional use permits that are ridiculous, as far as I can tell from, a year and a bit. Let's see. I was mildly curious why we were separating out all of the new zoning district definitions in a completely new section in 12280 instead of in the 1296. I don't know if that has to do with severability or something, like if there was some complaint about our zoning. It just sort of, I don't know. It probably doesn't matter. It sort of just, it seemed odd.
I can take that on. It's, as Kelly mentioned, when you touch one chapter, there's a ripple effect. So we came to learn that we have modernized the definition in the parking chapter. If you remember, a year ago we brought it to you, and we're also proposing new definition in the Bayhill chapter, and we're doing a lot in each chapter. And so the thought came to our mind, why not have a definition chapter to consolidate all of that? So you'll see that's kind of the thing in this effort, is that because we started with a limited scope, and then now we're expanding, because once you touch something, everything else gets touched.
Right. So I'll just add on to that chapter 12.80 definitions is an existing chapter that's been heavily amended to update all of the land use categories consistent with the new mixed use zoning chapter. And then we're actually rescinding the definitions that are in the parking chapter. So it's all being consolidated into one definitions chapter that applies to the whole code.
Sorry, I was referring to 12.280. There's 1296, which was the old zone definition. So if you look in 1296, you have 1296.70 is R2, 1296.80 is R3, and then instead of having the new TOD1, TOD2, and so in there.
Okay, I understand now. I think that this is one. It's kind of one chapter with multiple zoning districts within it, so it was determined that it would be best to have just a new chapter. But I understand your question is about just organizationally why we're not adding this into 12.96 as several different sections.
Yeah, a subsection of 1296 that all of our zone definitions would be in one place, which I don't know. In terms of usability of the document, it's all legalese and it probably requires interpretation regardless, but I did find it weird as I was reading through it. It's okay, I've got zone definitions, and then there's a bunch of other stuff, and oh, hey, more different zones. What? There's something a little...
I think it's kind of the way that we're doing it in this chapter is a bit more modern than what's in those old ones. You can see that there's just kind of a list of permitted uses there. There's not a table. It's just a bit of formatting and organizational ease that's achieved with adding a new chapter. And I know that that's also consistent with how the Bayhill specific plan district will be added.
We may do a separate chapter or included in the new 280.
12.290, I believe.
Okay. All right. We already discussed transportation management. Oh, yeah. And then one other just small quibble. On the zoning map, where was this? Was this towards the end? Like the actual, the full, the high-res map. Yeah, it's like page 176 of the packet. I was wondering what was up. Like we're zoning like 1 or 2 properties in off of El Camino as R2. I take it that's a rezoning from R1. And I think generally there is some merit to doing, you know, I mean, obviously, like we're going to be zoning for larger buildings directly on El Camino, and my sort of aesthetics is that the blend from large buildings to single family, like it's nice to have kind of a transitional space where you sort of might zone for, you know, N-plex style. And so I think it's good that we're putting art, but I wonder why we're not actually doing that further down the block, like to the entire block all the way to the next street, to allow conversions there, step-ups.
So just I'm on the page that you're referring to, and just to clarify, you're asking about like I think all of the existing zoning that's to the east behind there is R2. There were some parcels that were incorrectly zoned as commercial, and it was consistent with the general plan.
That explains it.
So that's why you kind of see those in yellow on that map, because those are part of the rezoning.
All right, that was all of my notes from my read through. I really appreciate your time and all your work on this. I'm really thrilled to see this, and I do definitely like having the multifamily zoning in the transit corridor is the only way. You know, like without this, there would be no way we could possibly meet, you know, either this cycle's RENA numbers or next.
All righty. Any other commissioners have questions? Comments? Okay, I've got a couple. 3 questions. Do ADUs count towards our RENA numbers?
That's a very good question. I think one that a lot of cities have. Pamela, do you want to take it?
Yes, it does. So it actually contributes to a large number of our small RENA number.
Gotcha. And then, Erin, this is a question for you. Going back to our history when you were the planning director here, and we had the fires or the explosion and the fires, and we had the rebuild, and we were allowing people to get, we were giving them a little bit of a grace of going to 0.61 on the FAR. Right. At this juncture where we're looking at this stuff, should we just codify that and make 6.1? Because we kind of continued to do that.
Yeah, I mean,
it just makes a number now.
Yeah, so that's always, I think historically, even, we did that for homes in the Glenview area, and basically said, hey, you're able to build this home without going through a more discretionary review process. My thought now of working in a bunch of cities is that San Bruno's FAR of 0.55 is actually pretty high comparatively to other cities. And I like that because it gives homeowners more flexibility. And I also like the fact, though, that you're able to go through a discretionary process to go beyond that. Because a home can get to start to get pretty big when you exceed that 0.55. And I think it is good to have additional eyes on it at that point to say, hey, you could still do this. It just has to be a pretty impressive design in order to exceed that. So I still think, actually, when I'm working with other cities, I show San Bruno as kind of a model one of, how you could still allow a pretty high floor area, but when you want to build bigger, the neighborhood, the neighbors next door should know what's going on, and they could be involved in the design review process.
Okay, thank you. So my last question is, based on the comments you've heard so far this evening, what additional comments or whatever would you bring to City Council from what we've said?
So I think that the directive after this meeting is that we'll provide a full summary of the discussion tonight, and then council will opt to implement whichever portions of it that they agree with. Is that correct, Pamela?
That's correct. So, Mr. Chair, so we will, if you recall, we did a similar exercise for the parking update. So we took all of the comments, the questions, and forwarded on to the City Council for their consideration. What we're doing is to provide a more study session for Council to understand the magnitude of this update in addition to your input. So your action tonight is to adopt a resolution to forward your recommendation, in addition to provide your feedback, which we'll document and forward to council.
Thank you. Thank you. Mary Lou?
Through the chair?
Please.
I do have a question. There was a time that neighbors did not have to be notified, regardless of distance, of the square footage, so many feet from other residences. And I remember having discussion on that, but I don't quite remember the outcome. I have a personal experience. So right next door to me in my building that I owned down on the east of El Camino, right next door there was a project. It was an ADU. And so I was shocked. Being on a planning commission, I was really shocked that I didn't receive it. I thought it was an oversight. And then learned that that neighbors do not have to be notified with an ADU. But there was some discussion about that. And my recollection way back here is that has been changed. And I wanted just to bring that issue up.
So
I can answer that. I believe, Commissioner Johnson, the previous ADU ordinance requires a discretionary review for any ADU. So any discretionary review will require the notice to your neighbors, 300 feet, 500 feet from the subject site. Since 2017, and also most notably the 2019 update to the ADU, the city cannot require discretionary review for any new ADUs, meaning that if there's no discretionary review, there's no notices. So you probably are remembering an exercise. Sorry, go ahead.
I can understand and respect the way it's set up, but it's not reasonable. In my circumstance, it was 6 months project, and it took away 10 parking spots. And because the crew needed to be in there, and bulldozers, and the crew needed to park, and it was a horrific hardship for it was actually close to 9 months. So is there something in between that we can come to some discussion on it? It's not reasonable that a neighbor all of a sudden, like this is going on and you know nothing, and then you're getting the phone calls. I mean, there's just somewhat of a waste of time on that. So is there any consideration to look at this differently?
So I'm not sure that we have much. I mean, we could check in with outside counsel to see if there's any way to notice, even though the approval is not discretionary, Pamela. But I'm not sure. We don't have a lot of flexibility because of state law.
We don't, but we could definitely include that as a question for City Council to entertain. We cannot require this as a discretionary review because of the state law. We could ask City Council to possibly add a noticing requirement to the neighbors.
Or some kind of construction signage or something.
Or some sort of a construction signage. Keep in mind that when we say that there's no discretionary review, a homeowner can just come to the building counter and submit for a building permit to construct an ADU. So we also need to think about the timing of when they need to notify the neighbors. Was it during construction, prior to issuance of building permit, of what sort? We can, like I said, we can definitely document that in our summary minutes and forward on to council.
Okay, fair enough.
All right. Commissioner Harmon, please.
I just had quick follow-ups on both Mary Lou's remark and yours, Mr. Chair. I think I'm probably recognized as being pretty pro letting people build more housing. I think Commissioner Johnson makes a good point, though. I think it would be fair to do something like, include as part of the sort of fee for getting the permit, just like include enough cost to notify neighbors within 60 to 100 feet. Like, it doesn't need, like, just the people who are going to be directly impacted by construction equipment being there. Like, that seems fair, just to let them know. You're not going to prevent the construction. Obviously, it would be illegal to do so, but I do agree that it would be reasonable to have some kind of noticing, and certainly signage. And then regarding the ADUs, do I understand correctly that the big open question around ADUs is sort of, as we move into the housing element cycle, how many you're allowed to project to count towards your sort of expected production? Like that seems to, my understanding from kind of, reading about some of what's going on in SoCal where they're farther along in the cycle is that essentially some cities sort of tried to pretend that like every building that doesn't already have an ADU is going to add one, and therefore they're going to meet their numbers. And the HCD was like, no. that I think some of the cities like Huntington Beach and the others that are kind of notorious for avoiding production engaged in some shenanigans like that. But it's still an open question of exactly what is the fair way to estimate it. And this counting of ADUs towards the RENA numbers was my reason for being really interested in the interaction with the airport rules, because, we have a good chunk of Bayshore Circle and Bel Air, two substantial neighborhoods on the east side that if the ALUC rules applied, you clearly wouldn't be able to count. And, I want us to have flexibility to meet our numbers.
All right. I do have one comment on those subjects that Mary Lou brought up. If we're going to, perhaps we can, when we forward our comments to City Council, if we're going to send out a notice for ADUs, maybe we can create a courtesy notice to the neighbors and have it say it's not subject to review, so that it doesn't end up being a nightmare for the folks at the counter at City Hall. So that when it goes out, it's right on top. This is courtesy notice in the, not subject to review.
Right. I completely agree with that. I think the downside of a notice is it gives some people expectation that something could change, that you're notifying them. So you would absolutely have to be clear enough that saying, hey, this is just a heads up overall. This is being approved under local and state law. We just wanted to let you know this is being approved, not that you're having notice that you could comment on it later.
Exactly, and I think that would give notice to the neighbors in a fair way, and it would also save staff a whole lot of trouble. Okay, anyone else have comments, questions? All right, Pamela, should we open this to public comment?
I think so. You're ready.
All right, we're going to open this up to public comment, and once again, for those Zoom users who are out there, please use the raise your hand button, and for those on the phone, please use *9. And we'll wait a minute or two and see if Madeline has anyone with their hands raised.
I do not see any hands raised, Chair.
All right, we'll give them another minute. It's been a long meeting. No hands yet?
No hands.
Okay. Can we get a motion to close the public meeting then?
I will so move.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor? Oh, no, roll call vote, actually. I'm sorry. Madeline, would you assist us with that, please?
Sorry, I was on mute. Chair Biasotti?
Aye.
Vice Chair Harmon?
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson?
Aye.
Commissioner Lethen?
Aye.
Commissioner Madden?
Aye.
Commissioner Morgan?
Aye.
Okay,
6-0, motion passes.
And the public comment is closed. So, last chance for anyone on the commission. Any more comments, or would anyone like to make a motion to forward this to the City Council? Adopt the resolution and send it to the City Council.
I would like to move to forward our recommendation to Council. Do we need to discuss, is it a positive recommendation, or it's just the summary of the discussion?
I believe it's just a summary. Isn't that correct, Pam?
It's just a summary. Staff has been taking notes. You don't have to itemize all your comments.
There's sort of no need for it to be like a positive finding versus negative. Okay. Well, in any case, I will move that we close discussion of the topic, forward our conversation to the City Council.
A clarification, I think you do have to adopt a resolution, recommend the City Council to approve the ordinance amendment.
I see. Yeah, usually when there's a specific resolution, it's in the agenda, like just directly kind of there of what the recommended is, and it's not in this case, it seems like. But sorry, is the recommended resolution text somewhere?
I don't see it.
Hold on, I'm pulling it up. And are you just asking for the full title of the resolution or for the motion?
Sorry, Annie, I think the question is the resolution in the packet?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think I just found it.
On page 17 of the PDF.
Yes, it's adopt a resolution recommending the City Council adopt the ordinance amending San Bruno Municipal Code Title 12, Article 3, and amending the zoning map. That was the recommendation. Sorry, I was having trouble finding the right text.
Thank you, Commissioner. And do we have a second to that motion?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Commissioner Morgan. All right, we have a motion and a second. Madeline, would you assist us with a roll call, please?
Yes, Chair Biasotti,
Aye.
Vice Chair Harmon,
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson,
Aye.
Commissioner Leffen,
Aye.
Commissioner Madden,
Aye.
Commissioner Morgan.
Aye.
6-0, the motion passes.
Thank you. All right, item number 5, items from staff.
I don't have anything other than I'll see you in 2 weeks.
Very good. Should we open up for public comment for items not on the agenda, as we usually do? Item 6 is our usual. Okay. Let's open up public comment for anyone who wants to address the commission for anything that's not on the agenda. And once again, Zoom users, raise your hand button, and people on the phone, it's star 9. And Madeline, if you would let us know if we have anybody.
We do not have anyone with their hands up or phone call-ins.
All right, in that case, we will skip to item 7. Subcommittee meetings. Is there anyone with any information to bring to the commission? No? All right. With that, we are adjourned until the next regular Planning Commission meeting on February 16th at 7 p.m. Thank you, everyone, for all your time and effort and energy that went into this. It was quite a project. So, thank you all.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for having this special meeting. Good night.
Good to see everyone.
See you guys.